3 heartbeats. That's how long Helen had relief before the doctor said the name. Justin Baker's son was the match. The billionaire who'd erased himself from her life 9 years ago with money and silence, his dying 12-year-old, was the only person on Earth who could save her triplets. And here's the part that makes this impossible. To save her 3 children, Helen would have to ask that man to risk losing his only one. You think you know how this ends? You don't. Because when a mother who's been surviving alone for 9 years comes face to face with the one person she never wanted to need again, everything you think about sacrifice gets turned inside out. Stay with me. This gets so much more complicated than you think. Helen Watson had been sitting in the same chair for 2 weeks now. She'd memorized the crack in the wall behind Dr. James's desk, the way the fluorescent light flickered every 40 seconds, the faint squeak his chair made when he leaned forward to deliver bad news gently. Today, he was leaning forward. Sherry pressed closer against Helen's left side, her thin fingers clutching the hem of Helen's sweater. 8 years old, and already too small for her age. Graf sat rigid in the chair beside them, jaw locked, trying to look braver than any child should have to. Jennifer stared at the tile floor, tracing invisible patterns with the scuffed toe of her sneaker. Triplets. Identical in so many ways. Identical blood disorder. Identical need. And now identical countdown. They all require a bone marrow transplant, Dr. James said quietly. His voice had that practiced gentleness Helen had come to recognize in medical professionals, the tone reserved for delivering unbearable truths. Soon. Helen nodded. She understood the word soon now. It didn't mean next month or next year. It meant the guillotine was already falling. We've tested your extended family, he continued, glancing down at the file in front of him. Your sister, your mother, both cousins. No matches. Helen's hands tightened in her lap. We've run the international registries, Dr. James said, called in favors, expanded the search parameters twice. He paused. Pay attention to this pause, it's about to change everything. Helen noticed that pause. Doctors thought parents didn't catch it, that half-second hesitation before difficult words. But Helen caught everything now. She had to. And, her voice came out steady, she'd learned how to do that too. Dr. James exhaled slowly. There is a match. Relief hit her so hard her vision blurred. Sherry's grip on her sweater tightened. Graf's shoulders dropped half an inch. Jennifer looked up from the floor for the first time in minutes. A perfect match, Dr. James added. Helen felt her heart restart. Then he said, but the donor is a minor, and medically fragile. The room tilted. She heard the words, but they didn't arrange themselves into meaning right away. Minor, fragile. Those weren't words you wanted attached to the person who held your children's lives in their hands. He's 12 years old, Dr. James said carefully. He has stage 4 leukemia. The relief drained out of Helen's body like someone had pulled a plug. He's receiving treatment at Mercy General, the doctor continued. His prognosis is uncertain. The transplant procedure could weaken him significantly. There are serious risks involved. Helen's throat closed. Whose son? She whispered. Dr. James hesitated again. Longer this time. Remember this moment. Remember the exact way her world is about to split open. Then he said the name. Justin Baker. The air left the room. Helen heard it, felt it land like a fist to the sternum, but her brain refused to process it. She sat perfectly still, aware of Sherry's hand in hers, Graf's breathing beside her, Jennifer's confused face turning upward. Justin Baker. Billionaire CEO. The man whose face smiled from magazine covers under headlines about innovation and second chances. The man who'd walked out of her life 9 years ago, with a wire transfer and a silence that never broke. The man who'd never met his own children. And now his son, the child from his real marriage, the life he'd chosen, was dying. And that child's bone marrow was the only thing that could save Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer. Can you imagine? Can you imagine spending 9 years building a life where someone's name never gets spoken? Where their absence is just the shape your family takes, and then suddenly that person becomes the only thing standing between your children and death? Dr. James was still talking, something about protocols, consultations, ethical reviews. Helen heard none of it. She was back in a different room. 9 years ago. Holding a pregnancy test with shaking hands, while Justin paced her tiny apartment. Already distracted by phone calls and investor meetings. Triplets? He'd said, as if she'd told him she was pregnant with aliens. "That's not Helen. That's not possible." "It is," she'd replied, voice steady even though terror was blooming in her chest. "And I'm keeping them." He hadn't yelled, hadn't begged, hadn't argued. He'd just gone quiet. And a week later, he was gone. Helen came back to the present when Sherry tugged on her sweater. "Mom?" Helen looked down. Sherry's eyes, too big for her face now, shadowed with exhaustion, were searching hers. Is it good news?" Sherry asked. Helen's heart cracked. She looked at Dr. James. He was watching her with the careful expression of someone who knew exactly what name he'd just detonated into her life. "It's complicated," Helen said finally. Graf's jaw tightened again. Jennifer had gone back to staring at the floor. "The boy's father will need to consent," Dr. James said. "And given the donor's condition, there will be extensive consultations. This isn't a straightforward case." Helen almost laughed. Straightforward. Nothing about Justin Baker had ever been straightforward. What happens if... She couldn't finish the sentence. Sherry was right there. They all were. Dr. James understood. If the donor's family declines, or if his medical team determines he's not strong enough for the procedure, we keep searching. But Helen. He didn't finish either. He didn't have to. There wasn't time to keep searching. And what Helen didn't know yet, what she couldn't have known, sitting in that office with her children's hands in hers, was that across the city, in a hospital room that cost more per night than she made in a month, there was a 12-year-old boy who just overheard his father's name mentioned alongside 3 children he'd never heard of before. A boy who was about to make a choice that would define all of them. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That night, Helen didn't sleep. She lay in the dark of her bedroom, listening to the apartment settle around her, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the soft breathing of her children in the next room. She stared at the ceiling and let herself remember the things she'd spent 9 years not thinking about. Justin Baker hadn't always been a billionaire. When Helen met him, he was just a man with a sharp mind and a pitch deck, working 18-hour days to turn an idea into funding. She'd been drawn to his focus, the way he could hold an entire room's attention without raising his voice. For 6 months, that feeling had been enough. Then came the pregnancy test. Helen could still remember the exact weight of it in her hand, the way the plus sign had appeared, clear and unmistakable. She'd sat on the edge of the bathtub in her tiny apartment bathroom for 20 minutes before she'd been able to move. When Justin arrived that evening, she'd handed him the test without preamble. He'd stared at it, then at her, then back at the test. "You're sure?" he'd asked. "I took 3, Helen had said. He'd nodded slowly, started pacing, pulled out his phone twice, then put it away. She'd watched him process it in real time, the mental calculations, the rearranging of timelines, the quiet panic he was trying to contain. "Okay," he'd said finally. "Okay, we'll figure this out." But he hadn't met her eyes when he said it. And here's the thing about men who say, "We'll figure this out," without looking at you, they've already started figuring out how to leave. 2 weeks later, came the ultrasound. Helen had gone alone. Justin had a meeting with investors he couldn't reschedule. The technician had gone quiet halfway through, then excused herself. When she came back with the doctor, Helen had known something was different. "Miss Watson," the doctor had said gently, "you're carrying triplets." The word had hung in the air like something physical. Helen had called Justin from the parking lot. Her hands had been shaking so badly she'd almost dropped the phone. "Triplets?" he'd repeated. His voice had gone flat, distant. Helen, that's not possible." "It is," she'd said, gripping the steering wheel with her free hand. The doctor just confirmed it. 3 heartbeats. Silence on the other end. "I'm keeping them," Helen had added, because she'd needed him to know that before anything else was said. "All of them. I'm keeping them." More silence. Then, "I need to think." He'd hung up before she could respond. Helen had driven home in a fog. She'd made herself dinner, sat on her couch, waited for him to call back. He hadn't. Not that night, not the next day, not the day after that. On the 4th day, his assistant had called. Donna. Professional. Efficient. The kind of voice that delivered difficult information as if reading from a script. "Miss Watson, Mr. Baker has asked me to reach out regarding the situation," Donna had said. "No greeting, no pleasantries. He wants to handle things privately and respectfully." Helen had understood immediately. Privately meant without him. Respectfully meant money. He's prepared to provide financial support, Donna had continued. A monthly sum to cover expenses. Medical care, child care, whatever you need. His attorney will draw up the paperwork. I don't want paperwork, Helen had said quietly. I understand this is difficult, Donna had replied, her tone unchanging. But Mr. Baker believes this is the best path forward for everyone involved. Everyone involved. As if there were multiple parties to consider, instead of just Helen and 3 children who would never know their father. Will he? Helen had stopped, swallowed. Will he want to be part of their lives? The pause had been brief, but definitive. Mr. Baker feels it would be better for the children to have stability, Donna had said. A clean arrangement. He doesn't want to create confusion or false expectations. Translation? No. And you know what? Some of you watching this know exactly what that phone call feels like. You know what it's like to realize the person you thought would stand beside you has already walked away. You know what it's like to choose between anger and survival, and to pick survival because anger is a luxury you can't afford when you're about to become a mother of 3. If that's you, if you've ever had to be stronger than you wanted to be, because someone else chose to be weaker than they should have been, then you're in the right place. Because this story? It's for women who've carried weight they never should have had to carry. And if you stay with me, you're going to see what happens when that weight finally shifts. Subscribe if you want to see how this ends. Because I promise you, the confrontation that's coming is worth every second. And there are hundreds of stories, like this one here. Stories about women who refuse to break even, when breaking would have been easier. You're not alone in this. Helen had stood in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, and felt something inside her go very still. Not broken, not shattered, just quiet. Tell him I'll take the money, she'd said. And tell him he doesn't get to change his mind later. Understood, Donna had replied. The first transfer will arrive within the week. And it had. Every month since, like clockwork. Enough to cover rent, groceries, medical bills. Enough that Helen could work part-time and still be present for her children. Enough to ensure the triplets never went without. But never accompanied by a phone call, a letter, a message. Just numbers appearing in an account. Helen had made a decision that first year, when Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer were still small enough to fit in her arms all at once. She would not waste energy on bitterness. She would not spend her life explaining Justin's absence or defending his choices. She would not poison her children's childhood with anger over a man who'd chosen not to be there. She would simply move forward. Efficiency over grief. Survival over sentiment. She learned to braid hair with one hand while measuring medicine with the other. She learned which grocery store had the best sales on Thursdays. She learned how to answer the question, "Where's Daddy?" with calm honesty. Some families look different, and that's okay. The triplets had asked about their father exactly 3 times in 8 years. Once, when Sherry was 5, "Do we have a daddy?" "You did," Helen had said. "But he's not part of our family." Once, when Graf was 6, "Why didn't he want us?" Sometimes grown-ups make choices we don't understand, Helen had said. But that's about them, not you. You are wanted, every single day. Once, when Jennifer was 7, "What's his name?" Helen had paused before answering that one. Then she'd said, "It doesn't matter, sweetheart." And it hadn't. Until now. Helen had built a life where Justin Baker's name never crossed her lips at home, where his absence was simply the shape their family took, where the money that arrived each month was acknowledged silently and used practically, without ceremony or resentment. She had given her children stability, laughter, traditions that were theirs alone, Saturday morning pancakes, bedtime stories with all 3 of them piled into one bed, annual trips to the beach where they collected shells and built lopsided sand castles. She had given them a childhood that wasn't defined by what was missing. But sitting in the oncologist's office that afternoon, hearing his name spoken aloud for the first time in years, Helen had felt every carefully constructed wall crack down the center. Because Justin Baker wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was a man with a dying son. A son whose bone marrow could save her children, and Helen was going to have to ask him for it. The next morning, Helen called Dr. James. "I need to know what happens next," she said, without preamble. "We'll need to set up a meeting," Dr. James replied, "between you and Mr. Baker and his son's medical team. There are protocols." "How long do we have?" Helen interrupted. A pause. Weeks, Dr. James said quietly. Maybe a month. For all 4 children. Helen closed her eyes, set up the meeting. Helen, Dr. James said carefully, I want you to prepare yourself. This is an extraordinary situation. There are no guarantees. Mr. Baker may refuse. His son's doctors may advise against it. Even if everyone agrees, the procedure itself carries enormous risk. I understand, Helen said. But understanding and accepting were different things. That evening, Helen sat with the triplets at dinner, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, garlic bread from the freezer. Normal, routine. Except nothing was normal anymore. Jennifer pushed pasta around her plate without eating. Graf kept glancing at Helen like he was waiting for her to say something. Sherry had been unusually quiet all day. Finally, Jennifer set down her fork. Mom, she said softly, the boy who might help us. His dad. Helen's throat tightened. Do we have to ask him? Jennifer finished. And there it was. The question Helen had been dreading. The one she didn't have a good answer for. Because the truth was too complicated and too cruel that yes, they had to ask him. And no, he didn't deserve to be asked. And yes, he might say no. And yes, her children's lives depended on a man who'd walked away from them before they'd even been born. Helen looked at her daughter, this brave, quiet girl who never asked for anything, and felt the carefully maintained stillness inside her finally rupture. Yes, Helen said, we do. And what Helen didn't know yet was that at that exact same moment, across the city, Justin Baker was sitting in a hospital room having the exact same conversation with a son who already knew more than he should. James Baker was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. Not the exhaustion that came from staying up too late or playing too hard. This was the bone-deep weariness of a body that had been fighting itself for 2 years. He sat in the hospital bed, the private suite on the 8th floor of Mercy General, that had become more familiar than his own bedroom, and watched his father pace. Justin had been pacing for 20 minutes now, back and forth across the polished floor, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and intense as he spoke to someone James couldn't see. Another specialist, another experimental treatment, another person who might have answers. James had stopped counting how many calls like this there had been. Dad, he said quietly. Justin held up one finger. Just a minute. James waited. He was good at waiting now. The hospital had taught him patience, the way other kids learned multiplication tables. When Justin finally ended the call, he came to sit on the edge of the bed. His tie was loosened. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked like he'd been awake for days, which he probably had. That was Dr. Chen, Justin said, managing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The immunotherapy specialist from Singapore. She's willing to consult remotely. We're setting up a video conference for tomorrow. Okay, James said. Justin's smile faltered. You don't sound excited. James chose his words carefully. I'm just tired, Dad. Something crossed Justin's face, pain, maybe, or fear, but he smoothed it away quickly. He was good at that. James had noticed it over the past 2 years. His father could hide almost anything behind competence and action. I know, buddy, Justin said, reaching out to squeeze James's shoulder. But we're going to beat this. We're close. I can feel it. James nodded because that's what his father needed. But privately, quietly, James had stopped believing in close about 6 months ago. He'd overheard too many hushed conversations between doctors, seen too many expressions carefully rearranged when he entered rooms, felt his own body getting weaker despite everything they tried. James Baker was 12 years old, and he understood more about his own mortality than most adults ever would. And here's what nobody tells you about dying children: they're often the bravest people in the room, not because they want to be, but because everyone else is too terrified to face what they already know. You should go home, James said. Get some sleep. Justin shook his head. I'm fine. Dad, I'm staying, Justin said firmly. Then softer. I want to be here. James didn't argue. He'd learned that was pointless too. After Justin finally dozed off in the chair by the window, James lay in the dark and thought about things 12-year-olds shouldn't have to think about. About what happened if the next treatment didn't work. About whether his mother, Justin's wife, Claire, would be okay after. About whether he'd been a good son. About whether dying hurt as much as living like this did. He didn't tell anyone these thoughts. They were too heavy, and everyone around him was already carrying so much. The next morning, Dr. Morrison came in with James's latest blood work results. James had learned to read the doctor's face before he read the numbers. Today, Dr. Morrison's expression was carefully neutral, which meant the news wasn't good. Justin stood by the window, arms crossed, waiting. "The white blood cell count is down again," Dr. Morrison said, setting the tablet on the bedside table, "and his platelets are dropping." "What does that mean?" Justin asked, even though they both already knew. "It means his body is struggling," Dr. Morrison said gently. "The leukemia is progressing, despite the current treatment protocol." The room went very quiet. James watched his father's jaw tighten. Watched him process the information the way he processed everything, looking for solutions, angles, ways to negotiate with the unnegotiable. "There has to be something else we can try," Justin said. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Morrison replied. "But Justin, I need you to understand how fragile James is right now. Any additional stress on his system—" "I understand fragile," Justin interrupted. "What I don't understand is giving up." "I'm not suggesting we give up," Dr. Morrison said carefully. "I'm suggesting we be realistic about what his body can handle." Justin turned away, hands clenched at his sides. Dr. Morrison glanced at James, and James saw the apology in his eyes. Adults always looked at him like that now, like they were sorry for things they couldn't control. "I'll be okay," James said quietly, because someone needed to say something. Both men looked at him. "You don't know that," Justin said, his voice cracking slightly. "No," James agreed. "But I'm okay right now, and that's enough. Remember that line. I'm okay right now, and that's enough. You're going to understand why it matters soon." Later that afternoon, while Justin was on another call with another specialist, the hospital administrator appeared in the doorway. Margaret Chen was a small woman with steel-gray hair and a manner that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by very little. She knocked softly on the doorframe, waiting for Justin to notice. He ended his call immediately. "Margaret, I need to speak with you," she said, privately. Justin glanced at James. "Can it wait?" "No," Margaret said, not unkindly, but firmly. They stepped out into the hallway. Through the partially open door, James could hear their voices low and serious. "There's a situation," Margaret was saying. "A woman came to see me this morning, Helen Watson." James heard his father go very still. "She has 3 children," Margaret continued. "Triplets, 8 years old. They all need bone marrow transplants urgently." "What does that have to do with me?" Justin's voice sounded strange, tight. "Her children were tested against the registry. There's only one match in the entire system." Silence. "Justin," Margaret said quietly, "the match is James." More silence. "Then, that's impossible." "The genetic markers don't lie," Margaret replied. "I've reviewed the results myself. It's a perfect match. All 3 of her children and your son share." "Don't," Justin interrupted. His voice had gone cold. "Don't finish that sentence." But James's mind was already finishing it. "Share genetic markers," which meant they were related, which meant his father had other children. Children James had never known about. He sat very still in his hospital bed, processing this information the way he'd learned to process everything quietly, carefully, without letting anyone see how much it affected him. Through the door, he heard his father say something else, too low to make out. Then Margaret's response, clear and firm. "She's not asking lightly, Justin. Her children are dying. And yours is the only match." "My son is dying too," Justin said. And James had never heard his father's voice sound like that before. Raw and desperate and utterly broken. "I know," Margaret said gently. "So what exactly is she asking me to do? Let them take his bone marrow while he's already barely hanging on? Risk weakening him further? For children I've never—" He stopped. James closed his eyes. "Children I've never met," his father had been about to say. Which meant they existed. Which meant his father had left them. "The procedure carries risks for James," Margaret acknowledged. "Significant ones, given his condition. But it also might be these children's only chance." "And if it kills him?" Justin asked. "If I agree to this, and it's the thing that—" He couldn't finish. "I can't answer that," Margaret said. "No one can. But Helen Watson is coming here tomorrow. She wants to meet with you. She deserves that much. She deserves—" Justin's voice rose, then dropped again. "She doesn't get to show up after 9 years and ask me to sacrifice my son. 9 years." James did the math quickly. The triplets were 8. Which meant his father had been with their mother when James was 3 years old. Which meant his parents' marriage, the one James had always believed was solid and whole, had fractures he'd never seen. The hallway went quiet again. Then Justin spoke, his voice low and hard. "My son cannot be currency." Footsteps moved away. The door opened, and Justin came back in. His face was composed again, the mask firmly in place, but his hands were shaking. "Dad," James said quietly. Justin looked at him, and for just a moment, everything he was trying to hide showed through. "Not now, James," he said. "Please." So James didn't ask. He lay back against his pillows and stared at the ceiling and thought about 3 children he'd never met, who shared his blood and needed something only he could give. And he thought about his father, who just said James wasn't currency. But what James heard underneath those words was something else entirely. "I cannot lose you. I will not choose them over you. You are all I have." James understood that. He understood it completely. But understanding didn't change the fact that somewhere in this same city, there were 3 8-year-olds who were just as sick as he was. 3 kids who had a chance, if he gave it to them. And for the first time in 2 years of fighting his own dying body, James Baker felt something shift inside him. Not fear. Not resignation. Something else. Purpose, maybe. Or the beginning of a choice his father wasn't ready to let him make. The conference room on the 7th floor of Mercy General was aggressively neutral. Beige walls. A long table with 8 chairs. A window that looked out onto the parking lot. No medical equipment. No personal touches. Just a space designed for difficult conversations that couldn't happen anywhere else. Helen arrived first. She sat with her back to the window, hands folded on the table in front of her. She'd left the triplets with her sister, told them she had an important meeting, which was true, and that everything would be okay, which might not be. She wore the same clothes she'd worn to every hospital appointment for the past 3 weeks. Jeans, a sweater, practical shoes. She hadn't dressed up, hadn't tried to look like anything other than what she was, a mother fighting for her children's lives. The door opened. Justin Baker walked in, and Helen felt 9 years collapse into nothing. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His hair was shorter, touched with gray at the temples. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Helen's rent, but it hung on him like he'd lost weight recently. He stopped when he saw her. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. This is the moment. Pay attention to what doesn't get said here. It matters more than what does. Then Justin closed the door behind him and walked to the opposite side of the table. He didn't sit immediately, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at her with an expression Helen couldn't read. "Helen," he said finally. His voice was the same. That startled her more than anything else, that after everything, after 9 years of silence, his voice could sound exactly the way she remembered. "Justin," she replied. He sat down slowly, maintaining the distance of the table between them. Helen waited. She'd come here to ask for something, but she wasn't going to make it easy. If he wanted to speak first, wanted to fill the silence with explanations or justifications, he could try. He didn't. Instead, he said, "I'm sorry." Helen had known those words were coming, had prepared herself for them, but hearing them still felt like something sharp pressed against her sternum. "Don't," she said quietly. Justin's jaw tightened. "Helen, I didn't come here for apologies," she interrupted. Her voice was calm, even. "I came here because my children are dying, and your son is the only match. That's all this is." Justin leaned back in his chair. "That's all this is," he repeated. "You show up after 9 years, and I'm just supposed to." "You don't get to do that," Helen said. She kept her hands folded, kept her voice level, but there was steel underneath it now. "You don't get to act like I'm the one who disappeared. I've been right here, same city, same life. You're the one who chose not to be part of it." "I sent money," Justin said. "Every month. I made sure you had everything you needed." "Money isn't presents," Helen replied. "But I'm not here to argue about the past. I'm here because Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer are running out of time." Hearing their names seemed to hit him. Helen saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe, or guilt, but he composed himself quickly. "My son is dying too," Justin said quietly. "I know. He's 12 years old. He's been fighting leukemia for 2 years. He's exhausted, fragile. The procedure you're asking for could..." He stopped, swallowed. "It could kill him." And if he doesn't do it, Helen said, my children will definitely die. The words hung in the air between them. What would you do? If you were sitting at that table, knowing that saving one child might cost another, how do you even begin to make that calculation? Justin looked away, toward the window. The doctors say there's a 30% chance the procedure could cause serious complications for James, that his immune system is already so compromised that extracting bone marrow might infire. Might, Helen interrupted. 30% chance of complications. My children have a 100% chance of dying without a transplant, within weeks. You're asking me to risk my son's life for children I don't know, Justin said, turning back to her. Children who are yours, Helen countered. Justin flinched. I gave up that right 9 years ago. You gave up a lot of things 9 years ago, Helen said. But biology doesn't care about rights. They're still yours. And they're dying. So is James. Then let him choose. The sentence came out before Helen had fully planned it, but once it was spoken, she knew it was right. Justin stared at her. He's 12 years old. And he's the one being asked to give up part of himself, Helen said. Not you, not me, him. Doesn't he deserve to make that choice? He's a child, Justin said. He doesn't understand the risks. My children are 8, Helen replied. And they understand they're dying. Kids know more than we want them to. Justin stood abruptly, walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, shoulders rigid. Helen waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I've spent 2 years trying to save him. Every specialist, every treatment, every possibility. I've restructured my entire life around keeping him alive. I know what that's like, Helen said. I've been doing it with 3 children for the past 2 weeks. Every minute feels like a year. Justin turned around. Is that supposed to make me feel guilty? I don't care how you feel, Helen said, and meant it. I care about what you do. What I do, Justin repeated. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want me to convince my dying son to undergo a painful, risky procedure to save siblings he's never met. Children whose existence you ignored, Helen finished. Say it plainly. You knew they existed. You chose to pretend they didn't. Justin's hands clenched at his sides. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Helen said. Fair would be our children being healthy. Fair would be them never having to meet like this. But fair isn't on the table, Justin. Survival is. He sat back down, slowly. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the table. And here's where everything shifts. Watch what happens when 2 people who've spent 9 years avoiding each other finally have to face the one thing neither of them can control. If I agree to let James decide, Justin said carefully, and he says yes, and something goes wrong, then you'll blame me, Helen said. I understand that. Will you? Justin asked. Will you really understand if your children survive because mine didn't? The question landed like a blow. Helen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Justin was watching her with an intensity that made her chest tight. I think about that, she admitted. Every hour. What it means to ask this. What it costs. I think about your son, who I've never met, who's already suffering. And I think about my children, who've never known their father, who are suffering too. And there's no version of this where everyone wins, Justin. There's only versions where maybe someone survives. That's not good enough, Justin said, but his voice had lost its edge. It's all we have, Helen replied. They sat in silence. Outside, the sun was starting to set. Golden light slanted through the window, catching dust motes in the air. Somewhere in this building, 4 children were fighting for their lives. Somewhere in this building, decisions were being made that would define all of them forever. If we do this, Justin said finally, if we let James decide he meets them first, Helen nodded. Okay. And he gets full information. Medical risks, probabilities, everything. Agreed. And if he says no, then that's his answer, Helen said. I won't push. I won't manipulate. I won't make him feel guilty. I just want him to know the truth. Justin studied her face. You really mean that? I've spent 9 years teaching my children that other people's choices aren't their fault, Helen said. I'm not going to stop now. Something shifted in Justin's expression. Not softening, exactly, but recognition, maybe. Of the woman she'd become in his absence. They're good kids? he asked quietly. Helen's throat tightened. They're remarkable. Justin nodded slowly. Then, James is gentle. Too gentle for this world sometimes. He thinks about other people more than himself. If we tell him there are 3 children who need him, he'll want to help, even if it costs him everything. He sounds like a good person, Helen said. He is, Justin replied, which is why I'm terrified of letting him make this choice. And there it was. The truth underneath everything. Not that Justin didn't want to help. Not that he was cruel or heartless. He was just a father who'd already lost so much, staring down the possibility of losing everything. Just like Helen. I'm terrified too, Helen admitted. Every second. Of what I'm asking. Of what it means. Of what happens if. She couldn't finish. Justin reached across the table. Stopped halfway. Let his hand rest there, palm down against the smooth surface. Helen looked at it, this gesture that wasn't quite an offer, wasn't quite anything, and felt the weight of 9 years and 3 weeks and 4 dying children pressed down on both of them. We were never good at this, Justin said quietly. Talking, being honest. No, Helen agreed. We weren't. Maybe we should have been. Maybe. Justin pulled his hand back. I'll talk to James. Tomorrow. You should be there. So should the triplets. Helen's heart stuttered. You're sure? No, Justin said. But I'm sure that hiding him from this would be worse. He already knows. He overheard Margaret talking to me yesterday. What did he say? Helen asked. Justin's expression cracked slightly. Nothing. He didn't ask a single question. Just laid there, processing it alone. Like he's processed everything else alone for 2 years. Helen understood that more than he knew. Tomorrow, then, she said, standing. Justin stood too. They faced each other across the table, this space that had held their stalemate, their grief, their impossible situation. Helen, Justin said as she reached the door. She turned back. If this works, he said slowly. If all 4 of them survive, I don't expect anything. I don't get to be their father. I know that. Helen looked at him for a long moment. That's not up to you anymore, she said quietly. If this works, if they survive, they'll be old enough to decide what they want. You gave up the right to decide that 9 years ago. She left before he could respond. In the elevator, Helen finally let herself shake. Tomorrow, her children would meet their father. And a 12-year-old boy would be asked to make a choice no child should ever have to make. Justin sat on the edge of James's hospital bed and tried to remember how to be honest. He'd spent 2 years protecting his son from brutal truths, softening diagnoses, spinning statistics into hope, turning terminal into treatable, and months into we'll see. He'd become fluent in the language of deflection. But this morning, looking at James's too-thin face against the white pillow, Justin knew he couldn't do that anymore. There's something I need to tell you, he began. James set down the book he'd been reading, about the woman who came to see Margaret. Justin shouldn't have been surprised. James noticed everything, absorbed conversations, through walls, read meaning in silences. He'd learned to survive by paying attention. Yes, Justin said. Her name is Helen Watson, and she has triplets who need bone marrow, James added quietly. Who match with me. You heard that part too. James nodded. Justin took a breath. There's more. The reason they match with you is because they're your half-siblings. He waited for shock, anger, confusion. Instead, James just tilted his head slightly. How old are they? 8. James did the math silently. Then, so when I was 3. Yes. Were you still married to Mom? The question hit like a blade between ribs. Yes, Justin admitted. Your mother and I were going through a difficult time. I made a choice I shouldn't have made. Helen got pregnant. And he stopped. Started again. I left. I sent money. But I didn't meet them. I didn't try to be part of their lives. 1. James absorbed this information the way he absorbed everything quietly, thoroughly. What are their names? He asked. Justin felt his throat close. Sherry, Graf, Jennifer, are they nice? The question was so unexpected, so completely James, that Justin almost laughed. Almost. I don't know, he admitted. I've never met them. James considered this. But you're going to. Today, they're coming here. Helen wants you to meet them before you decide anything. Decide if I'll donate bone marrow, James said. Not a question. A clarification. Yes. James looked down at his hands, thin fingers that bruised too easily now, veins visible through translucent skin. Dr. Morrison says, I'm fragile. You are, Justin said carefully. The procedure carries risks, serious ones. Your immune system is already compromised, and extracting bone marrow would weaken you further. There's a 30% chance of major complications. What kind of complications? Justin had promised honesty. Infection. Hemorrhaging. Organ failure. In the worst-case scenario, it could accelerate your condition. James nodded slowly. And if I don't do it? Then, they keep searching for another match. But their doctors say they have weeks, maybe a month. So they'll probably die, James said plainly. Yes. The room filled with the soft sounds of medical equipment, monitors beeping, IV drip counting out seconds. Outside the door, a nurse walked by pushing a cart. Life continuing as if they weren't discussing impossible choices. This is what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face impossible questions with clear eyes. Dad, James said finally, if you were me, what would you do? Justin wanted to lie. Wanted to say, I'd protect yourself, or you don't owe them anything. But James was watching him with those clear, knowing eyes, and Justin found he couldn't. I don't know, he said honestly. I'd like to think I'd be brave enough to help, but the truth is, I'm terrified of losing you, and that fear makes me selfish. You're not selfish, James said. You're my dad. Something in Justin's chest cracked open. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Margaret stood there with Helen and 3 children who looked impossibly small in the hospital corridor. They're here, Margaret said gently. Helen had told Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer everything in the car. Not the complicated parts about their father, those could wait. But the essential truth. There was a boy who might be able to help them, and they were going to meet him today. What if he doesn't like us? Sherry had asked, voice barely above a whisper. Then we thank him for his time, Helen had replied, and we keep fighting. Now, standing outside James Baker's hospital room, Helen felt every hour of the past 9 years pressing down on her. She squeezed Sherry's hand once, met Graf's eyes, touched Jennifer's shoulder. Remember, she said quietly, he's sick too. Be kind. They nodded. Margaret opened the door. The room was larger than the Triplets' shared hospital space, more window, better furniture, equipment that looked newer. James sat in the bed, and beside him stood Justin. Helen's children looked at their father. Justin looked back, and James looked at all of them with an expression of quiet curiosity. Hi, James said, breaking the impossible silence. I'm James. I'm Sherry, Sherry said softly. Then, gaining courage, this is Graf and Jennifer. James smiled. It was a small smile, tired around the edges, but genuine. It's nice to meet you. Helen saw Justin watching his children, all 4 of them with an expression she couldn't name. Pain and wonder and regret, all twisted together. James, Justin said carefully, this is Helen. James looked at her directly. You raised them by yourself? The question surprised her. Yes. That must have been hard. It was, Helen admitted. But they made it worth it. James nodded like he understood. Then he turned to Justin. Dad, could I talk to Helen? Just her? Justin stiffened. James. Please, James said. Not demanding, just asking. After a long moment, Justin nodded. I'll take Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer to the family lounge. Show them the garden view. He shepherded the triplets out, and suddenly, Helen was alone with a 12-year-old boy who held her children's lives in his dying hands. James waited until the door closed. Then, he sent you money, right? Every month? Yes, Helen said. But he never visited. No. James looked toward the window. He's afraid of failing. That's why he stayed away. If he never tried, he couldn't do it wrong. The observation was so precise, so compassionate, that Helen felt something shift in her chest. You're very wise, she said quietly. I'm just sick, James replied. You learn to see things differently when you're dying. Helen sat in the chair. Justin had vacated. Are you scared? Sometimes, James admitted. Mostly, I'm tired. But today, he paused. Today, I feel like maybe there's a reason I'm still here. You don't owe us anything, Helen said. I need you to know that. Just because you share blood doesn't mean you're responsible for saving them. I know, James said. But what if I want to? Remember that question. What if I want to? That's the moment everything changes. In the family lounge, Justin watched his children, all three of them, stand awkwardly by the window. Graf kept glancing at him with something that looked like anger. Jennifer wouldn't look at him at all. Sherry just seemed curious. You have his eyes, Sherry said finally, pointing at Justin. All of us do. Justin looked at her, really looked, and saw it was true. Same shape, same color, genetic echoes he'd tried to ignore. Do you like books? Graf asked suddenly, addressing the air beside Justin rather than Justin himself. I do, Justin said carefully. James was reading when we came in, Graf continued. What kind of books does he like? And just like that, they weren't talking about themselves. They were talking about their dying brother they just met, trying to understand him through details. Fantasy mostly, Justin said. Adventures, stories where heroes have to make impossible choices. Jennifer finally looked up. Does he know he's the hero? The question stopped Justin cold. I don't think he thinks about it that way, Justin said softly. He should, Jennifer replied. Because he is. When they returned to James's room, Helen was standing by the door. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling slightly. James would like to talk to the triplets, she said. Alone. Justin started to protest, but Helen shook her head. He asked, Justin, let him. So the adults stepped out together this time, and left 4 children in a room full of medical equipment and impossible decisions. Sherry approached the bed first. Does it hurt? Being sick? Sometimes, James said honestly. What about you? I'm tired a lot, Sherry admitted, and my bones ache. Mine too, James said. Jennifer sat on the edge of the visitor's chair. We didn't know about you, about having a brother. I didn't know about you either, James replied, but I'm glad I do now. Graf stood with his arms crossed, trying to look tough. You don't have to help us, even if they say you do. I know, James said. So why would you? Graf demanded. We're strangers. James thought about this. Are we though? We have the same blood. The same eyes, apparently. The same father, even if he was only around for some of us. That's not your fault, Sherry said quickly. It's not yours either, James replied. They sat together for almost an hour, not talking about transplants or probabilities or dying, just talking. About favorite colors and schools, and what it felt like to be scared. About siblings and parents, and the strange way life worked sometimes. About the small things that make us human when the big things feel too heavy to carry. When the adults came back, all 4 children were quiet. James looked at Justin. Then at Helen. Then at his half-siblings, who were also his genetic matches. I want to do it, he said simply. Justin started. I want to do it, James repeated, firmer now. Not because I have to, not because anyone made me, because they're my brother and sisters, and if I can help them, then that's what I should do. You could die, Justin said, his voice breaking. I'm already dying, Dad, James said gently. But maybe this way, it means something. And in that moment, surrounded by 4 children who all understood mortality better than they should, Helen and Justin both realized the same thing. The bravest person in the room was 12 years old, and he'd already made his choice. You know what strikes me about James? He's 12 years old, and he understands something most adults never learn, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose to matter, choose to mean something in someone else's survival. If you've ever made a choice that scared you but felt right anyway, if you've ever chosen love over safety, generosity over self-protection, then you know exactly what James is feeling right now. Stay with this story, because what happens next will test every single person in this room. And if you're here because these kinds of stories remind you what human courage actually looks like, hit that like button. Let me know you're here. Let me know these stories matter to you the way they matter to me. The formal consent meeting happened 3 days later, in a conference room that felt too small for the weight it was holding. James sat at the head of the table with Justin on one side, and his mother Claire on the other. Claire had flown in from Chicago the moment Justin called, an elegant woman with James's gentle eyes and a composure that was cracking at the edges. Helen sat across from them with the triplets, and between them all sat Dr. Morrison, Dr. James, and a surgical team lead named Dr. Patel. Dr. Patel had kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that suggested she'd been through this particular hell before. I'm going to be very direct, she began, looking at James. Because you deserve the truth, and sugarcoating this serves no one. James nodded. He looked small in the large chair, but his expression was steady. The bone marrow extraction procedure will require general anesthesia, Dr. Patel continued. We'll make several incisions in your hip bones and use needles to withdraw marrow from multiple sites. Under normal circumstances, this is painful, but relatively safe. She paused. You are not normal circumstances, James. Your platelet count is critically low, which means you'll bleed more easily and clot more slowly. Your white blood cell count means your body can't fight infection effectively. Your overall condition means your body is already operating at its absolute limit. Justin's hand tightened on the edge of the table. What does that mean, exactly? James asked quietly. It means there's a 32% chance of major complications during or immediately after the procedure, Dr. Patel said. Hemorrhaging, infection, organ failure, cardiac arrest. Claire made a sound small and wounded. It also means, Dr. Patel continued, that the procedure will almost certainly weaken you significantly. Your recovery time will be longer and more difficult than a healthy donor's. And given your leukemia progression, we cannot guarantee your body will recover at all. The words hung in the air like smoke. But if I don't do it, James said, they die. Dr. Patel glanced at the triplets, then back at James. Yes. And if I do it, there's a 68% chance I'll be okay? No, Dr. Patel said, and Helen saw Justin flinch. There's a 68% chance you won't have major complications from the procedure itself. But James, you're not okay now. The leukemia is progressing. This procedure won't heal you. At best, it won't accelerate your decline. At worst, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I understand, James said. Do you? Dr. Morrison interjected. James, I need to hear you say it. What do you understand? James took a breath. I understand that this might kill me. I understand that even if it doesn't, I'll be weaker after. I understand that I'm choosing to risk my life for people I just met. He looked at Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer. People who are my family anyway. James, Claire started, but her voice broke. James turned to his mother. Mom, if it were me who needed the transplant, and there was a kid somewhere who could save me, wouldn't you want them to try? Claire's face crumpled. She couldn't answer. Dr. Patel pushed a form across the table. This is the consent document. It outlines every risk we've discussed. As a minor, you cannot legally consent alone. Your father must sign as well. She slid another form toward Justin. Justin stared at it, like it was a live grenade. I can't, he whispered. The room went silent. I can't sign something that might kill my son. Justin continued, his voice breaking. I can't. I won't. Dad, James said. Justin looked at him, and Helen saw 9 years of carefully maintained control finally shatter. Justin's face twisted. His hands started shaking. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. This is what breaking looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a man realizing he's out of ways to protect the person he loves most. You're all I have, Justin said, and he was crying now openly, desperately, in front of everyone. You're all I have that matters, and I can't lose you. I can't. You'll still have me, James said gently. Even if the worst happens, you'll always have me. That's not enough, Justin sobbed. James reached across and took his father's shaking hand. It has to be. Helen watched this, a father breaking in real time, a son holding him together, and felt guilt rise in her throat like bile. This was her fault. She'd brought this situation into existence. She'd asked a dying child to save her children, and now she was watching a man crumble under the weight of an impossible choice she'd forced on him. I'm sorry, Helen said, her voice cracking. Justin, I'm so sorry. Don't, Justin said, turning to her with wild eyes. Don't apologize. If you apologize, it means you had a choice, and you didn't. None of us do. He looked back at the consent form, picked up the pen, signed his name with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. When Dr. Patel took the forms and left to schedule the surgery, the room slowly emptied until only the two families remained. Claire stood abruptly. I need air. She walked out without looking at Helen or the triplets. Justin sat with his head in his hands, and the four children sat very still, understanding that something irrevocable had just happened. That night, the triplets each processed James's decision in their own way. Sherry knelt by her bed and prayed. Helen found her there, hands clasped, lips moving silently. When she finished, she looked up at her mother with eyes too old for 8 years. "I asked God to save them both," Sherry whispered. "James and us. Is that selfish?" "No, sweetheart," Helen said, pulling her close. "That's hope." But Sherry shook her head. "It feels like asking for too much." Graf didn't pray. He paced his hospital room like a caged animal, then suddenly grabbed the plastic water pitcher from his bedside table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, water and ice scattering everywhere. "He shouldn't have to," Graf shouted when Helen rushed in. "He shouldn't have to save us. He's just a kid. He's sick. It's not fair." "I know," Helen said. "Then why are we letting him do it?" Graf demanded, tears streaming down his face. "Why are we letting him die for us?" "Because he asked to," Helen said quietly. "Because it's his choice." "It's a stupid choice," Graf yelled, but he was crying harder now, and when Helen reached for him, he collapsed against her. "I don't want him to die, Mom. I don't want anyone to die." "I know, baby," Helen whispered into his hair. "I know." Jennifer didn't pray or yell. She simply stopped talking. For 2 days, she said nothing, didn't ask questions, didn't respond when spoken to. Just stared at the walls with an expression that looked like she'd gone somewhere far away where none of this could reach her. Helen tried everything, gentle coaxing, direct questions, silence to match silence. Nothing worked. On the 3rd day, Jennifer finally spoke. "If he dies," she said, voice flat and hollow, "it's because of us." "No," Helen said immediately. "It's because of leukemia, because of bad luck, because life is sometimes cruel, but not because of you." "That's not true," Jennifer said. She still wasn't looking at Helen. "If we didn't exist, he wouldn't be doing this. So it's because of us." "Jennifer, I don't want to be the reason someone dies," Jennifer whispered. "I'd rather die myself." Helen felt her heart crack completely open. She knelt in front of her daughter and took her face in both hands, forcing eye contact. "Listen to me," Helen said fiercely. "James is not dying because of you. If anything happens to him, it's because of a disease that was killing him before he ever knew your name. You are not responsible for his leukemia. You are not responsible for this choice. You are 8 years old, and none of this is your fault." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Then why does it feel like it is?" "Because you're kind," Helen said. "Because you have a conscience. Because you're a good person who understands that other people matter." "But Jennifer, baby kindness doesn't mean carrying guilt that isn't yours." Jennifer finally broke, sobbing into Helen's shoulder while Helen held her and wished desperately that she could take all of this pain and carry it herself. Surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. James was admitted the night before for prep. The triplets were admitted to separate rooms on the same floor. They'd received the transplant simultaneously once the marrow was extracted. Helen barely slept. She sat in the hallway between her children's rooms and James's, unable to be everywhere at once, unable to choose where she was most needed. At 4 a.m., she found Justin in the same hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair stood up in places. He held a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. They sat together in silence for a long time. Then Justin said, "If he dies and they live, I'll never forgive you." Helen nodded. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself," Justin added. "I know that too," Helen whispered. They sat there as the hospital began to wake around them, nurses changing shifts, machines beeping, dawn light starting to filter through windows. At 5:30, the surgical team arrived. Dr. Patel approached them with the calm of someone who'd walked this path many times. "It's time." They brought James out first on a gurney. He was already drowsy from pre-medication, but his eyes were open. When he passed Helen, he smiled slightly. "See you on the other side." Helen couldn't speak, could only nod. Justin walked beside the gurney all the way to the surgical suite doors. When they stopped, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to James's forehead. "I love you," Justin said, voice breaking. "More than anything, more than everything." "I know, Dad," James murmured. "That's why I'm doing this." Then they wheeled him through the doors, and he was gone. They brought the triplets out, next Sherry, then Graf, then Jennifer, each on their own gurney, each looking small and scared. Helen kissed each of them, whispered, "I love you and be brave, and I'll be right here when you wake up." When Jennifer passed, she grabbed Helen's hand. Mom? Yes, baby? Tell James thank you. Then, she was gone too. And Helen and Justin stood in the empty hallway and waited for the surgeries that would decide if any of their children would survive. This is the moment where most of us would fall apart completely. Where the weight of what we've asked for, what we've had to ask for, becomes too much to carry standing up. And if you're still here, if you're still with me in this hallway with Helen and Justin, then you understand something important, that some stories don't give us easy answers. They give us truth. They show us what love actually costs when everything is on the line. Comment below and tell me, could you have done what Helen did? Could you have asked? Because I need to know I'm not the only one who thinks about these impossible choices. And share this with someone who needs to know that surviving impossible situations is something women do every single day. We do it quietly, we do it alone, but we do it. The surgical waiting room on the 8th floor had 23 chairs, 4 magazines from last year, and a coffee machine that had been broken since Thursday. Helen counted these things because counting kept her mind occupied, kept her from imagining what was happening behind the sealed doors down the hall, kept her from thinking about scalpels and needles and 4 children under anesthesia simultaneously. Justin sat 3 chairs away. Not beside her, not across from her, just near enough to share the same terrible space. Claire had taken a separate waiting room on the other side of the floor. Helen had seen her briefly in the hallway before the surgeries, this elegant stranger who had every right to hate her but had simply looked through her as if she didn't exist. As if Helen were just another piece of medical equipment, something necessary and unfortunate. The clock on the wall read 6:47 a.m. They'd been waiting 47 minutes. The surgery was estimated at 4 to 6 hours. Helen did the math. They had somewhere between 3 hours and 13 minutes to 5 hours and 13 minutes left. Or longer, if there were complications. She stopped doing math. Pay close attention to time now, because time becomes the enemy when you're waiting for news that could destroy you. Justin's leg bounced rhythmically, a small, unconscious movement that betrayed the anxiety he was trying to contain. His phone sat dark in his hand. He hadn't looked at it once. Helen wondered if that was a first for him, this complete disconnection from the world he usually controlled. At 7:15, a nurse Helen didn't recognize poked her head in. "Miss Watson? Mr. Baker? Just wanted to let you know all 4 patients are stable, and the procedures are underway. No updates yet, but everything is on schedule." She disappeared before either of them could ask questions. "On schedule," Justin repeated flatly. "What does that even mean?" "It means they're not dead yet," Helen said, then immediately regretted how harsh it sounded. But Justin just nodded. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." They fell back into silence. At 7:43, Helen's sister called. Helen let it go to voicemail. She couldn't form words right now, couldn't reassure anyone, couldn't be strong for people who weren't in this waiting room bleeding terror into these chairs. At 8:02, Justin stood abruptly and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders rigid. Helen watched him and remembered sitting in a different room 9 years ago, watching him pace while trying to process the news of Triplets. He'd stood at a window then too, looking for escape, maybe, or answers the outside world couldn't provide. "Do you believe in God?" Justin asked suddenly, still facing the window. Helen considered the question. "I don't know. I want to." "James does," Justin said. "He prays every night. Thanks God for the good parts of his day. Never asks why he's sick, just accepts it." "Sherry prays too," Helen said quietly. She prayed for both of them, for everyone to survive. Justin turned around. His eyes were red-rimmed. "That's too much to ask for, isn't it? For all of them to make it through." "Probably," Helen admitted. "But she's 8. She doesn't know she's supposed to choose." Justin walked back to his chair. This time he sat only 1 seat away. "If I have to choose," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "between him living and them living." "Don't," Helen interrupted. "Don't finish that sentence. Don't make that choice in your head. It's not yours to make." "I'm making it anyway," Justin said. "Every second. And I hate myself for it." Helen understood. She was making impossible choices too, imagining futures where some children survived and others didn't, weighing lives against each other, hating herself for every calculation. At 8:34, the door opened again. Both of them looked up with identical expressions of desperate hope. But it was Donna, Justin's assistant, carrying a tray with real coffee from the cafe downstairs and something that looked like breakfast sandwiches. "Margaret said you've been here since 4, Donna said, setting the tray on the small table. "You should eat." Neither of them moved toward the food. Donna hesitated, then sat down across from them. She looked older than Helen remembered from that phone call 9 years ago. Tired lines around her eyes, gray threaded through her dark hair. "Any news?" Justin asked. "I checked with the surgical desk," Donna said carefully. "They're still in procedure. James's extraction is taking longer than anticipated." Helen felt her stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "They didn't say," Donna admitted, "just that Dr. Patel needed more time." Justin's hands clenched into fists. "More time because something's wrong, or more time because it's complicated?" "I don't know," Donna said. "They don't give details to non-family." "Then why tell us at all?" Justin demanded, standing up. "Why come in here and say it's taking longer without any context? What am I supposed to do with that information?" "Justin," Donna started. "No," Justin said, his voice rising. "Every minute they're in there is another minute something could go wrong. Every delay is another." He stopped, sat back down hard, put his face in his hands. Donna looked at Helen helplessly. "Thank you for the coffee," Helen said quietly. "And for checking." Donna nodded and left, and the room felt smaller somehow, more airless. And this is how waiting kills you. Not all at once, just piece by piece, minute by minute, until you're not sure how much of you is left. At 9:17, Helen went to the bathroom and cried silently in a stall for 3 minutes. Then washed her face and came back to find Justin in exactly the same position. At 9:52, another nurse came in. Different one, younger. "Update on the Watson triplets," she said, consulting her tablet. "Jennifer and Graf's transplants are proceeding smoothly. Sherry experienced a brief blood pressure drop, but the team stabilized her. All 3 are holding steady." "And James Baker?" Justin asked immediately. The nurse checked her tablet. "I don't have information on that patient. Different surgical team." She left. Justin stood up again. Started pacing. "Why would they update us on the triplets, but not James? Why wouldn't they?" "Because he's not our patient," Helen said. "They're probably updating Claire." Justin pulled out his phone, stared at it. "She's not answering my calls." "Would you?" Helen asked. "If you were her?" Justin's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. At 10:23, Dr. James, the pediatric oncologist, walked past the waiting room without coming in. Justin saw him and rushed to the doorway. "Dr. James." The doctor stopped, turned. His expression was carefully neutral, the mask Helen had learned to recognize as meaning bad news contained. "Mr. Baker," Dr. James said, "I'm on my way to check on something. I don't have updates right now." "But you know something," Justin said. "I can see it on your face." Dr. James hesitated. Then, "There have been some complications with James's procedure. Dr. Patel is handling it. That's all I can say right now." "What kind of complications?" Justin demanded. "I'm not on that surgical team," Dr. James said. "I'm sorry. As soon as Dr. Patel can step away, she'll brief you personally." He walked away quickly, and Justin stood frozen in the doorway. Helen came up behind him. "Justin, don't," he said, voice hollow. "Don't tell me it's going to be okay. Don't tell me to have hope. Don't." His phone rang. He looked at the screen, answered immediately. "Claire, what?" He stopped, listened. His face went gray. "How much blood? When did more listening?" "No, they haven't told me anything. I'm coming to you right now." He hung up, looked at Helen with wild eyes. "He's hemorrhaging," Justin said. "They can't stop the bleeding." Then he was running down the hallway toward wherever Claire was, and Helen was left standing alone in the waiting room doorway, watching him disappear around a corner. She walked back inside, sat down, stared at the clock. 10:31 a.m. 4 hours and 31 minutes since the surgeries began. Her children were receiving bone marrow from a boy who was bleeding out on an operating table. Helen doubled over, arms wrapped around her stomach, and tried not to scream. At 10:47, no one came with updates. At 11:03, no one came with updates. At 11:19, a code blue was announced overhead for the 8th floor surgical suite. Helen stopped breathing. This is the moment. The one we've been dreading. When hope and horror collide and you don't know which one wins. At 11:34, Dr. Patel finally appeared in the doorway. Her surgical mask was pulled down. There was blood on her scrubs. Her face was drawn with exhaustion. Helen stood up on legs that didn't feel like they belonged to her. "Where's Mr. Baker?" Dr. Patel asked. "With his wife," Helen managed. "Is James? Someone needs to find him," Dr. Patel said. "Right now." And Helen knew. She knew from the blood on the doctor's scrubs, and the careful steadiness of her voice, and the way she wouldn't quite meet Helen's eyes. Something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Helen found Justin in a small consultation room 3 doors down from where she'd been waiting. He was sitting beside Claire, both of them staring at nothing. Claire's hand rested on the armrest between them, not touching Justin, but close enough to suggest they'd forgotten how to reach for each other a long time ago. "Dr. Patel is looking for you," Helen said from the doorway. Justin's head snapped up. "James, she needs to talk to you," Helen said. "Both of you, now." They moved as one, following Helen back down the hallway, where Dr. Patel stood, waiting outside the closed surgical suite doors. Her mask was off now, and Helen could see the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "James is alive," Dr. Patel said before anyone could ask. The words hit like a physical force. Justin's knees buckled slightly. Claire made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "He's alive," Dr. Patel repeated, "but it was close. He hemorrhaged during the marrow extraction more severely than we anticipated. We lost him for 90 seconds. "Lost him," Claire whispered. "Cardiac arrest," Dr. Patel said bluntly. "We got him back. But he lost a significant amount of blood. He's in ICU now, sedated, on multiple support systems. The next 72 hours will be critical." Justin was shaking. "But he made it through the surgery." "He survived the surgery," Dr. Patel corrected. "Survived and made it through are different things, Mr. Baker. His body has been through tremendous trauma, on top of an already compromised immune system. He's weak, very weak." "The marrow," Helen heard herself say. "Did you get enough?" Dr. Patel turned to her, and Helen saw something complicated in the doctor's expression: respect, maybe, or resignation. "Yes, Dr. Patel said. We extracted sufficient bone marrow before the hemorrhaging began. Your children received their transplant successfully. All 3 procedures went smoothly from the recipient's perspective." Helen felt the room tilt. "They're okay?" "They're stable, Dr. Patel said carefully. "The transplants took, but Miss Watson, you need to understand, we won't know if the marrow will engraft properly for weeks. Right now, they're in isolation rooms, heavily medicated, being monitored constantly. The transplant is just the beginning. Their bodies still have to accept the new marrow, start producing healthy blood cells, fight off potential rejection. But they have a chance," Helen said. "Yes," Dr. Patel confirmed. "They have a chance." Justin turned away abruptly, hands gripping the back of his neck. Claire stood perfectly still, tears running silently down her face. "I want to see him," Justin said, voice muffled. "Soon," Dr. Patel said. "He's being moved from recovery to ICU. Give the team 30 minutes to get him settled." She walked away, leaving the 3 of them in the hallway. Claire looked at Helen for the first time, really looked at her. "Your children are stable," Claire said. Her voice was eerily calm. "That must be a relief." "Claire," Justin started. "No," Claire said, still watching Helen. "I want to hear her say it. I want to hear her tell me she's relieved that my son nearly died to save hers." Helen met her gaze. "I'm not relieved. I'm grateful, and devastated in equal measure. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry in ways I don't have words for." "Sorry doesn't matter," Claire said. "Sorry doesn't change what just happened in that operating room." "You're right," Helen agreed. "It doesn't." Claire's composure cracked. "He's 12 years old. He was dying anyway, and now he's dying faster because of you." "Because of me," Helen said quietly. "Yes." The acknowledgement seemed to take something out of Claire. She sagged against the wall. "I should hate you." "You should," Helen said. "But I don't," Claire whispered. I'm just so tired." Justin stood between them, looking lost. This man who'd built empires, who'd controlled rooms with his voice, reduced to helplessness in a hospital corridor. "I need to see him," Claire said finally. She walked away without looking at either of them. Justin watched her go. Then he turned to Helen. "You should check on your children," he said. Not an accusation, just a statement. Helen nodded and started to walk away. "Helen," Justin called. She stopped. "He knew," Justin said. "James knew what could happen, and he chose it anyway." "That's not on you. That's on him being braver than any of us." Helen's throat tightened. "Does that make it better or worse?" "I don't know," Justin admitted. "I don't know anything anymore." Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer were in separate isolation rooms on the 6th floor, each behind glass, each connected to machines and monitors that beeped steadily. Helen saw them one at a time, gowned and masked, standing at the glass barriers that separated them. Sherry was awake, drowsy but alert. She raised one small hand when Helen appeared. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice muffled through the intercom. "Hi. Sweetheart," Helen said, pressing her hand against the glass. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Sherry said. "Did it work?" "Too early to know," Helen admitted. "But the doctors say it went well." "And James?" Sherry asked. Helen hesitated. "He's alive, but he's very sick." Sherry's eyes filled with tears. "I prayed so hard, Mom." "I know, baby," Helen said. "Sometimes prayers take time to get answered." Graf was asleep, chest rising and falling steadily beneath the thin hospital blanket. Helen stood at his window for 10 minutes, just watching him breathe. Jennifer was awake, but not responsive. Her eyes were open, tracking Helen's movements, but when Helen tried to talk to her through the intercom, Jennifer just stared. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Helen asked. Jennifer blinked once. "The surgery is over," Helen said. "You did so well. I'm so proud of you." Jennifer's eyes slid away, focusing on the wall instead. Helen understood. Her daughter had gone somewhere safe inside herself, somewhere the guilt and fear couldn't reach. Helen would wait however long it took for her to come back. She found Justin in the ICU waiting area at midnight. He was alone. Claire had gone to sit with James, only one parent allowed at a time, 30 minutes each hour. Justin looked like he'd aged a decade in one day. "They're saying the next 3 days will determine if he rebounds," Justin said when Helen sat down. "If his body can handle what it's been through, if infection sets in, if his organs hold." "And after 3 days?" Helen asked. "Then we get to worry about the next 3 days after that," Justin said. "And then the ones after that, until either he gets stronger or he doesn't." They sat in silence for a long time. "I thought I could save him," Justin said finally. "Every specialist, every treatment, every experimental drug. I thought, if I just tried hard enough, wanted it badly enough, I could force a different outcome." "You can't control everything," Helen said. "I'm learning that," Justin replied. He looked at her. "You raised them alone. 3 children, no help." "I had help," Helen said. "Your money helped." "Money isn't help," Justin said, echoing her words from 9 years ago. "No," Helen agreed. "But it's what I had." Justin's hands clenched. "I don't know what happens now. If James survives this, if your children's transplants take, if everyone somehow makes it through, I don't know what that means, for any of us." "It means we figure out how to keep them alive," Helen said. "One day at a time." "And after that?" Helen shook her head. "I don't know either. But Justin, whatever happens, this doesn't make us a family. It doesn't erase 9 years. Redemption isn't the same thing as reunion." Justin looked down at his hands. "I know. If they survive," Helen continued. "If Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer want to know you, that's their choice. Not mine, not yours. Theirs." "And if they don't want to know me?" Justin asked quietly. "Then you live with that," Helen said. "The way I've lived with everything else." Justin nodded slowly. "I deserve that." "Yes," Helen said. "You do." She stood to leave, but Justin spoke again. "Helen, when James wakes up, when he's strong enough, I want him to know them, his brother and sisters. Not because it fixes anything, just because he should." Helen looked at this man she'd once thought she loved. This man who'd abandoned her and then broke himself, trying to save one child by sacrificing another. "We'll see," she said, "if any of them wake up strong enough for that." She left him there, hunched in a waiting room chair, holding vigil for a son who'd chosen courage over safety. And Helen went back to her own children, who were fighting behind glass walls with bone marrow from a brother they barely knew. All of them suspended in uncertainty. All of them surviving, but barely. all of them waiting to see if survival was enough. You know what nobody tells you about survival? That it's not the end of the story, it's just the place where a different kind of fight begins. These families, Helen's and Justin's, they're about to learn something most of us only figure out when we're forced to. That living through something and recovering from it are two completely different things. If this story is reminding you of your own survival, your own moment where everything hung in the balance and you didn't know which way it would fall, leave a comment. Tell me what you survived. Because I think we need to hear each other's stories. I think we need to know we're not alone in the aftermath. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because there are hundreds more stories like this waiting. Stories about women who held on when letting go would have been easier. Stories that remind us what strength actually looks like when everything is falling apart. The triplets' recovery happened in increments too small to celebrate. On day 4, Sherry's white blood cell count ticked upward by 0.3. The nurse called it promising. Helen called it not enough yet and kept vigil by the glass. On day 7, Graf sat up in bed for the first time. He looked at Helen through the barrier and gave her a weak thumbs up. She pressed her hand to the glass and pretended the tears running down her face were relief, instead of terror that this fragile progress could vanish at any moment. On day 9, Jennifer finally spoke. "Is James awake yet?" she asked through the intercom. Helen's throat closed. "Not yet, sweetheart." Jennifer nodded slowly, then turned her face to the wall. The truth was more complicated than not yet. James had woken on day 5 briefly, painfully long enough to squeeze his mother's hand and whisper something Claire wouldn't repeat. Then he'd slipped back under, and the machines had taken over breathing for him. By day 12, the triplets were out of isolation. By day 12, James was worse. Helen saw Justin every day in the hallways between floors. They developed an unspoken pattern, a nod of acknowledgement, sometimes a brief exchange of updates, never lingering. He looked hollowed out, running on something that wasn't quite hope anymore. More like the refusal to accept that trying could stop mattering. On day 15, Dr. Morrison pulled Helen aside. "The triplets' new bone marrow is engrafting," she said. "Their bodies are accepting it. Producing healthy blood cells. It's working, Helen." Helen waited for the relief to come. It didn't. Just a numb recognition that 3 of 4 children were surviving. "And James?" she asked, even though she had no right to. Dr. Morrison's expression shuddered. "That's not my case to discuss." Which was answer enough. Remember what James said? "I'm okay right now, and that's enough." That's what hope looks like when you're running out of time to hope for more. On day 17, Justin knocked on the door to Sherry's room. Helen looked up from the chair where she'd been reading aloud. Sherry was sitting up now, color slowly returning to her face, looking more like a child and less like a ghost. "Can I come in?" Justin asked. Helen glanced at Sherry, who nodded. Justin entered slowly, awkwardly, like he'd forgotten how to be in a room with his own daughter. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands shoved in his pockets. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Sherry replied. Silence stretched between them, this man and this child who shared DNA and nothing else. "I wanted to check on you," Justin said finally. "See how you were doing." "I'm getting better," Sherry said. She spoke carefully. Not coldly, just factually. "The doctors say the marrow is working." Justin's jaw tightened. "That's good. That's really good." More silence. Then Sherry asked, "Is James getting better too?" Justin looked at Helen, then back at Sherry. "No," he said honestly. "He's not." Sherry's eyes filled with tears. "Because of us?" "Because he was already sick," Justin said, moving closer. "Because leukemia doesn't care about anything. But not because of you. Never because of you. But he wouldn't be worse if he hadn't." "He made a choice," Justin interrupted gently. "He knew what could happen. And he chose it anyway. That's who he is. Someone who sees people hurting and wants to help." Sherry wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I want to meet him, properly, when he wakes up." "If he wakes up," Justin said, because lying to children hadn't worked for any of them so far. "When?" Sherry insisted quietly. "I'm praying every day." Justin looked at this daughter he'd never raised, this child who'd survived because his son had been willing to risk everything, and something in his face crumbled. "Thank you," he whispered, "for praying for him." After he left, Sherry looked at Helen. "He's sad." "Yes," Helen said. "Do you think he wishes he could go back?" Sherry asked. "And choose different?" Helen thought about the question. I think he wishes a lot of things, but going back isn't one of our options. Sherry nodded like she understood. Then, Mom, can we choose forward? Helen pulled her daughter close. Yeah, sweetheart, we can do that. Justin started showing up, not with grand gestures or explanations, just presence. He brought graph books on day 19, fantasy novels about impossible choices and heroes who didn't know they were brave. Graph accepted them warily, but Helen saw him reading late into the night, when he thought no one was watching. He sat with Jennifer on day 22, when she still wouldn't speak, didn't try to force conversation, just sat in the chair beside her bed for 30 minutes, then left quietly. The next day, Jennifer asked if he was coming back. He brought Helen coffee on day 25, the good kind from the cafe downtown, not the hospital's burnt offering. You don't have to do this, Helen said. I know, Justin replied, but I don't know what else to do, so I'm doing this. Helen studied him. This doesn't fix anything. I know that too, Justin said. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just showing up. Finally. 9 years late, Helen said. 9 years late, Justin agreed. But they're here now, and I can either keep hiding from that, or I can try to be present for whatever time we have. Helen didn't thank him, didn't forgive him, just nodded once and took the coffee. It was a start. Maybe not a good one, but it was something. On day 31, James woke up. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a slow, gradual return. Eyes opening, focusing, recognizing his parents beside his bed. Hey, he whispered, voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed the day before. Claire sobbed openly. Justin gripped his son's hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. Hey yourself, Justin managed. James smiled weakly. Did it work? You saved them, Justin said, voice breaking. All three. They're getting stronger every day. Good, James whispered. Then, can I meet them? For real this time? Justin looked at Claire, who nodded through tears. When you're strong enough, Justin said. James closed his eyes, exhausted from 5 minutes of consciousness. Tell them I'm glad I did it. He slipped back into sleep, not unconsciousness this time, just rest. And for the first time in 31 days, Justin let himself believe his son might survive this. On day 38, they wheeled James to the common room on the 6th floor. He was thin, weak, still tethered to an IV pole and monitors, but he was awake, present. Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer sat on the couch together, nervous energy radiating off them. When James came through the door, they all stood. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sherry stepped forward. Thank you, she said simply. James smiled, that same gentle expression Helen had seen in his hospital room weeks ago. You're welcome. Graf approached next, hands shoved in his pockets. I brought you something. He held out one of the books Justin had given him. Thought you might want to read it, since we're both, stuck here for a while. James took the book carefully. Thanks. Jennifer hung back, watching. Then quietly. Does it hurt? What you did for us? Sometimes, James admitted. But not as much as knowing I could have helped and didn't. Jennifer nodded, then, in a voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry you got hurt because of us. I'm not, James said. You're my brother and sisters. That means something. They spent an hour together, not talking about transplants, or dying, or the past. Just talking. About favorite things, and small hopes, and what the world looked like from hospital windows. When the nurses said James needed to rest, the triplets each hugged him carefully. As they wheeled him out, James looked back once and smiled. And Helen, watching from the doorway beside Justin, realized something. James might not survive this. The leukemia was still there, still progressing, still winning a war his body was too tired to fight. But he'd already won something bigger. He'd given 3 children a chance to grow up. He'd shown his father what courage actually looked like. He'd made a choice that mattered, in a world where so few choices did. And whether he lived for 30 more years or 30 more days, that choice would outlive him. On day 45, they discharged the triplets. Helen packed their things with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming weight of after. There was life beyond these walls. Life her children might actually get to live. Justin met them in the hallway as they were leaving. "I'd like to visit," he said. "Sometimes, if that's okay." Helen looked at Sherry, Graf, and Jennifer. "It's not up to me." Sherry spoke first. "Okay." Graf shrugged. "I guess." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Will you tell us about James? About who he was before all this?" Justin corrected gently. "Who he is." Jennifer agreed. "Yeah," Justin said. "I can do that." Helen didn't smile, didn't welcome him, just stepped aside so he could say goodbye to the children who were his by blood and strangers by choice. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. It was just proximity, permission for him to try, no promises about what that would mean. 3 months later, James was still alive. Weaker, quieter, spending more time sleeping than waking, but alive. The triplets visited twice a week, bringing drawings and stories, and the kind of gentle presence that asked for nothing in return. Helen and Justin never spoke about the past, never addressed what had been or what might have been. They existed in a carefully maintained present where 4 children knew each other, and that was enough. On a Tuesday in April, James asked to go outside. They took him to the hospital garden. James, in a wheelchair, the triplets walking slowly beside him, Helen and Justin trailing behind like mismatched bookends. James turned his face toward the sun and smiled. "This is good," he said. And for that moment, it was. Not forever. Not guaranteed. Not even certain to last beyond the next breath. But good enough. Because blood might have brought them together. But it was love, complicated, imperfect, hard-won love that let them stay. And sometimes, in the space between dying and living, that was everything. You're still here. That means something. It means you understand that the most powerful stories aren't the ones where everything works out perfectly. They're the ones where people make impossible choices and live with the consequences. Where survival doesn't look like victory, it just looks like another day. Helen didn't get her perfect ending. Justin didn't get redemption that erased 9 years of absence. James didn't get cured, but they got something else. They got moments. They got each other. They got a chance to choose love when fear would have been easier. And if you're watching this, because you've had to make impossible choices too, because you've had to be stronger than you wanted to be, braver than you thought you could be, then you already know what this story is really about. It's about showing up anyway. It's about choosing forward when you can't go back. It's about loving people even when that love costs you everything. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own impossible moments, your own survival, your own hard-won love, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, because there are hundreds more stories like this one waiting. Stories about women who refused to break, women who carried weight they shouldn't have had to carry, women like you. Share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their impossible situation. Someone who's making choices right now that terrify them but feel right anyway. And comment below. Tell me, what would you have done? Could you have asked what Helen asked? Could you have given what James gave? Because I think we learn from each other's answers. I think we need to hear how other people survive. Like this video if it made you feel something. If it made you think. If it reminded you that courage doesn't look like fearlessness. It looks like doing the terrifying thing anyway because someone you love needs you to. And I'll be here next time with another story that matters. Until then, choose forward. Choose love. Choose to show up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard.